Good evening. Welcome on in for the overnight edition of From Day One. And again, anytime technical difficulties happen, I find out later that we weren't hearing the right information. The date combination on the right-hand side was not showing the correct information. And no, I'm not taping a third time, so that's just gone out. Tonight's Art Bell is actually not going to be a Midnight in the Desert, actually. It's going to be from the show that actually caused Midnight in the Desert to actually come to be. So tonight we are going to go to a little dark matter. This would be a show from September 12th, 2013. I believe this was on Sirius XM. Tonight's host, of course, is Art Bell, but tonight's guest will be Dr. Steven Greer. And the topic will be extraterrestrials, aka the ETs among us. So if there's anything that I do need to go ahead and talk about for the Hero Wars, I will cut in. And of course we will mute for musical bumpers going in and out of commercial breaks. Other than that, let's get to a little dark matter.
Dark Matter with your host, Art Bell. Now, here's Art.
Well, hello, and welcome to Extraterrestrial Radio. It's called Dark Matter, and I am Art Bell. It's great to be here. Really great to be here tonight. I've got a few housekeeping issues to begin with tonight. I said last night, this is Sirius XM Radio, right? No rules. Well, one rule. My rule. No bad language. And then I went back to the house, after the show, and I downloaded all my email, and I had like 600 emails saying, oh, Art played this, and they played that in the middle of commercials and stuff, and Sirius XM violated the Prime Directive. But it's fixed. So, it's fixed. They promised me tonight all the things that'll fill the breaks will be clean and available for listening for delicate ears, including mine. So no bad language here. It's a bad language-free zone. Okay? And then there was WRT 104, Big Gamma Burst. I've got to tell you all, I've done a lot of shows, and it always happens to me that a guest will drop something on me that, say what? A gamma ray burst, and we're in the gun barrel. I think I'm quoting fairly accurately here, right? We're in the gun barrel. So, I did as Professor Kaku suggested, and I looked up WRT 104. And I'm on channel 104, right? See, that bothered me right away. I don't really number it. If you ever go on your phone or tablet or something, they actually don't number the channels. That's something I want to talk to Sirius XM about. They say we're on 104, the indie channel. I know that's where we are. But when you look on the menu, there's no number. At least I can't find it. So, WRT 104, great. Gamma ray burst, great. Sterilizing the planet kind of gamma ray burst, great. So here's what I want you to do. I did do the research, and I sent Keith Rowland, my webmaster, a picture of WR104. He's got it up on artbell.com. So you can actually see a picture of these two suns getting ready to dance. Oh, geez. And then there's also a moving file which will show you what a gamma ray burst will look like. Now, I don't know what it's going to look like from the perspective of the end of the gun barrel, but maybe we're going to find out. Anyway, I thought you'd want to know what it looks like, those two stars coming together. They've got an actual picture up there. The other is a simulation of a gamma ray burst. None of it's good. Not good at all. We've got an interesting program coming up tonight. Dr. Steven Greer. He's an old friend, great guy, and we're going to squeeze a lot from him tonight. All right, very quickly around the Naval Yard shooting. Well, the press is always, I'm sure Pierce Morgan is at it tonight. You have to go. As I've been watching all of this develop on the across the media, it occurs to me that, yeah, something's got to go, but it's not the guns. It's people who hear voices. Now, if we could control those people, we'd have hold of the problem. It's crazy people. Even Dr. Cuckoo last night said, it's crazy people, right? They hear voices. Give these papers to the Russians. Kill a bunch of people. Whatever. Well, this guy had a secret clearance. Secret clearance. So, I heard he went in twice, complaining that he was hearing voices, right? Oh, come on. If it's a case, then get some counseling. And, upon getting the counseling, at the very least, somebody ought to say something. I mean, if you've got a secret clearance, so, instead of controlling guns, control people who hear voices. They should be taken care of and helped. That's all I've got to say about that. Briefly looking around the world, it's a kind of an open and shut case. Word of the opening of Iran's blocked social media sites. They blocked everything. Iran just blocked everything. And then opened it up. And everybody went, yay, and now they blocked it again. Like an open and shut case. Brazil plans to divorce itself from the U.S.-centric Internet over Washington's widespread online spying, a move that sends chills down the experts. The dangerous potential for a step toward fracturing a global network built with minimal interference by governments. Well, anybody been up to Yukon lately? I don't know about minimal. The Concordia is coming back up. She went down, and it was very embarrassing for government in Italy, and now she has been righted, and the government in Italy feels better. Russia said Tuesday the UN Security Council resolution governing Syria's handling of its chemical weapons not allow the use of force. Well, if we can't use force, if they don't comply, then why should they comply? It seems like a fairly logical train of thought, doesn't it? A typhoon hit Japan Monday. Now, it's not good. The Japanese had to dump a whole lot more water, radioactive water, albeit, into the ocean. We don't know how much yet, but it was bad, bad, bad news for the Japanese. And probably bad news for us, too, huh? And I swear I'm going to do a whole show on this. The Russians, Putin came after us for American exceptionalism, right? Oh, God, what a phrase. American exceptionalism. And now Putin is, I guess, blaming American exceptionalism for the shooting. Me, I think it was a guy who hears voices. All right. That's it for now. We're going to take a very quick break. And then we'll come back. And we'll meet with Dr. Steven Greer. It's going to be quite a program. I think you're going to enjoy it. From the high desert and the great American Southwest, this is Dark Matter.
And again, we're muted because of the musical bumper. As soon as our musical bumper is gone, we will return. Hopefully it should only be a few seconds here. little longer than I thought for the bumper here.
Baby, and we're very serious. To call Art Bell, please manipulate your communication device and call 1-855-REAL-UFO. That's 1-855-732-5836.
Okay, I guess I have a little more station keeping to do here. Dr. Greer will be along in just a moment. I've got to remember social media. I'm on social media, and if you'd like to join me on Twitter, you're welcome to do so. I am ArtBell51. That's me, ArtBell51. So join me. Love to have you along. I will make pronouncements. Sounds like I'm a king, huh? I'll make pronouncements from there every now and then. Announcements, how about that? Pronouncement sounds too regal. So anyway, Twitter, ArtBell51. I do have a Facebook page, but it's filled up. Oh, yes, this. 5 million emails asking me about On Demand. So this show is available on demand. Let me read you a couple of things that people said, all right? Underneath the show description is a box with 2 tabs. On-demand shows and upcoming shows. Not too complicated. Go to artbell.com, click on the Launch Sirius XM Player link, right on the right-hand side of the webpage. If prompted, log on to the Sirius XM website with your account. On the player window, this is beginning to get complicated, click the green Shows on Demand button. Then in the search bar to the right of the green button, type in Art Bell. Then click on Demand Shows if it's not already open. And then finally, click on the show episode you want to listen to and enjoy. Get all that? And then here's another one. You can listen per scheduled show. If interrupted by, say, a phone call or on Androids, for example, the show will pause and pick up from the point of interruption. You will be behind the live show in this instance. You can push the Go Live button to get back to the show live. And you can do that. I guess shows will be archived for 30 days, it says. Shows, when downloaded, are commercial-free. Total showtime minus commercials is 3 hours and 30 minutes. See? That's how much content is really in this show, folks. You take out the commercials, and you still have 3.5 hours. Just thought of that. So, and it even goes to iTunes, this person says. I don't know. All right. I hope that does it. Dr. Steven M. Greer, MD, is founder of the Disclosure Project, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, the Orion Project, and Sirius Technology Advanced Research, LLC. Father of the Disclosure Movement, he presided over the groundbreaking National Press Club Disclosure event, May of 2001. Over 20 military, government, intelligence, and corporate witnesses presented compelling testimony regarding the existence of extraterrestrial life forms visiting the planet and the reverse engineering of the energy and propulsion systems of these craft. Over 1 billion people heard of the press conference. It's a lot. Through the original webcast and on subsequent media coverage on BBC, CNN, CNN Worldwide, Voice of America, Pravda, Chinese media, and media outlets throughout Latin America. The webcast had 250,000 people waiting online. Wow. That's the largest webcast in the history of the National Press Club at that time, and that's something. He's worked 17 years to bring together the scientists, inventors, and leaders in society to advance clean new technology, energy systems. He is considered one of the world's foremost authorities on the strategic process of transforming our carbon-based civilization, type 0 we are, to a long-term sustainable civilization using innovative sciences and technology. Dr. Greer is seen and heard by millions worldwide on CBS, BBC, The Joe Rogan Show, Discovery Channel, and the History Channel. Thrive and the Ancient Alien series. Oh, and through many other news sources. So, in other words, he's all over the place. Here, ladies and gentlemen, is Dr. Steven Greer. Dr. Greer, hello.
Hello. Glad to be with you again, Art.
Oh, it's great to hear your voice.
Thank you.
And it's great to be on the air again, too.
I agree. It is great to have you on the air again. We've missed you.
Thanks. All right. Now, we've got to keep in mind, Doctor, and so it's going to cause us to switch gears a little bit. There's about something like 27 million Sirius XM listeners. That's a lot. That's a lot.
I know. I'm one of them. I'm one of the subscribers. That's right.
Okay. All right. So they probably have may never have heard you before. And then, of course, we've got my regulars that have come across who will have heard you. What I'd like to do is kind of split the show in half if we can. Now, you've told me in the past some of the best UFO stories I've ever heard. And so I guess I would challenge you here at the beginning to say, look, if I was a non-believer and I were to ask you to do your best to convince me that UFOs and extraterrestrials are real, what highway would we go down?
Right, exactly. Well, it's the weight of the evidence. And, our website, our new website, which is SiriusDisclosure.com, which is a Sirius, just like Sirius XM, but SiriusDisclosure.com, we have a whole section on evidence, and we're loading up literally dozens of witness testimony from generals, colonels, pilots, astronauts and so forth, and as well as many government documents that we have obtained dealing with this. And so it's the weight of the evidence, and there's a lot of photographic and video evidence. And what I tell people is that, I just came back from a meeting with 120 world leaders on an island that I really can't discuss much more than that, except to say that this meeting happens every year. Last year, the former director of national intelligence for the United States was there speaking, and 2 years before that, it was Bill and Hillary Clinton. They asked me to come, and I was asked the same thing you just asked. And so I went through some of this material, and I'm happy to do it again. And, one of the things that I always point out to people is that, don't take my word for it per se, but, someone like Professor Hermann Oberth, who was the founder of the space age and was the German rocket expert, he said, and I'm quoting here, he says, "Is my thesis that flying saucers are real and that they are spaceships from another solar system?" And he goes on and on and on and on. What you find when you begin to drill down on this is that there's a lot of nonsense and sort of rubbish that I think has been built up around the subject, but at the core of it is a body of evidence that's indisputable by anyone who takes any sort of objective look at it. And President Truman, when they were looking into this during the Truman years and after the so-called Roswell event, he said, and I'm quoting, "I can assure you that flying saucers, given that they exist, are not constructed by any power on Earth." And I'm quoting. And, these are things that aren't in dispute and from people. And when you look at some of the senior military people who've dealt with this, like General Nathan Twining, he was the commander of the Air Material Command that received the materials from this crashed extraterrestrial vehicle at Roswell. And he says, the phenomenon reported is real and not visionary. There are objects approximating the shape of a disk of such appreciable size as to appear as large as a man-made aircraft and larger. There's the possibility that some of the incidents are caused by natural phenomena such as meteors, but the others report characteristics of extreme rates of climb, maneuverability, and action, which must be considered evasive and on radar, moving in such a way as to lend belief to the possibility that some of the objects are controlled either automatically or remotely, and it goes on. And then the CIA director, one of the early ones, the first one actually, Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter. Now this is the first CIA director, and it was formed in 1947 after the Roswell event. He says, "It's time for the truth to be brought out. Behind the scenes, high-ranking Air Force officers are soberly concerned about the UFOs, but through official secrecy and ridicule, many citizens are led to believe the unknown flying objects are nonsense. I urge immediate congressional action to reduce the dangers from secrecy about unidentified flying objects. Notice he didn't say dangers from the UFOs. It's the dangers from the secrecy, which was sort of echoing what Eisenhower said when he said, look, beware the military-industrial complex because it's gotten out of control. And in fact, one of the, we had a man who worked with Eisenhower in the White House, in the White House Signal Corps, who's one of our witnesses, who was with Eisenhower when he was talking about how he had been pretty much pushed aside from operational control over some of these programs dealing with UFOs. So, there's an enormous body of evidence. And one of the things that we did when in those last 15 years putting together the Disclosure Project, was to identify people like John Callahan, who was the head of the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration division in charge of looking into accidents and investigations. And many people don't know that this happened, but in the 80s, during the Reagan years, there was a Japan Airlines cargo jet flying the polar route from Paris to Tokyo. And the 747 came up very close to a massive UFO that was larger than a destroyer. In other words, larger than a battleship destroyer. And it was on radar on the 747. It was on ground radar, civilian, and then ultimately also we found out on military radar. The pilot signaled to this ET craft, and it signaled back, and then it began to move in ways that were completely nonlinear. In other words, it'd be...
Can I ask, Doctor, how do you know all this?
Well, for example, John Callahan, whose testimony is on our website at SeriousDisclosure.com. It's there for free for anyone to look at, no charge. He came forward with all the documents and the radar tapes. Now, it is a great story that I've actually never shared with you in the backstory to this. He heard me on, I think it was on Larry King, and he contacted my people and said, look, I'm one of those high government officials that knows about this, but no one's asking the right questions. And so he came forward with the radar tapes and the account of the pilot and the account of the F-16 military interceptors that were sent up, and this over Alaska. And what he told was a fascinating story that he thought when he was investigating this event, which is not in dispute, by the way, that this would blow the lid off the secrecy on this subject. Now, this is back in the 80s. And what happened is that there was a meeting that the head of the FAA called, and there were three people from President Reagan's CIA, three people from the White House Science Technology Group, and then three people from the FBI. And he was there with the admiral who at the time was the head of the FAA. And at the end of this very long meeting, he had boxes and boxes of digital printouts of the radar tapes, the transcripts of the pilot speaking to air traffic control, all the details. And the people from the CIA said, boy, this is one of the best documented cases we've ever seen. He says, and then they said to him, Mr. Callahan, this meeting never happened, and we have never discussed this. And at the end of the meeting, they ordered him to turn over all that material to these people at the CIA. Now, he has said all this publicly now. What they didn't know is that what he had brought to the meeting were copies. And so he gave to me all the originals, and I have them. So, the problem becomes very quickly is sort of what Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who headed up the Air Force kind of cover story operation called Project Blue Book, when he said, it's an embarrassment of riches. There's so much material. We now have about 4,000 cases where these objects have landed and left physical evidence. There are 3,500 cases, like I just described, where there have been military or civilian commercial pilots who have seen them with radar tracings, with often photos and videos. And you think, well, God, if there's all this stuff that exists, why isn't it on CNN every night? Or why isn't it on, the major news media? And that we can get to that in a moment. Yeah.
Yes, okay. Yeah. You're not going to tell me where the island was, are you?
It was somewhere out in the Pacific, yeah. But anyway, it was an interesting meeting. Now, it's one of these things where I was asked to come and brief these folks, and One of the other problem, and this is the part that your listeners will, when this is where they're going to see a little bit of shock and awe. And it's, from the time I briefed President Clinton, CIA director, nearly 20 years ago to today, what I have found consistently is that there are two tracks inside these government programs. One is the ordinary track that deals with things like Syria and Afghanistan and Iraq and nuclear weapons. Then there's a parallel track that's the so-called black projects or unacknowledged track. And just because someone is the Secretary of Defense or the CIA director doesn't mean that they're being pulled into and briefed on this other track. It's highly compartmentalized. And so at this meeting, what happened, and I just got back about 3 weeks ago, what I found is that there were people there from, senior government circles, from MIT, from ministries of defense, and it was 120 very high-ranking people from around the world. Virtually none of them knew about this. A couple did. And these were all people that if people out there in the conspiracy world would think that every single one of these people would have been on the inside and in the know. But the way the system runs is that it's so compartmented, it doesn't really matter what your clearance is. Top secret clearances, there are 985,000 people in America with top secret clearances. That and $1.50 gets you on the metro in D.C. But the reality is that the compartmented projects that deal with this are in a different level. And this is why, when I was first approached by the liaison from Clinton's CIA director to me, I got this letter, and I have it in my archive to prove this, and excerpts of it are up on our website, where he says, you're going to be the first person to brief the CIA director and the White House on this, because they've made inquiries and they're being denied any information. Now, when I got that letter, it was FedEx, actually. I said, this is the biggest bunch of bull I've ever heard. And I didn't believe a word of it. And so I went into this meeting. My wife and I both went up to Washington for the meeting. I said, this I don't believe. By the end of this 3-hour meeting, I came to understand that, in fact, there are very high-level people who are being left out of this information. And that began to happen in the 50s and 60s, is what Eisenhower was warning us about. So that in 2013, the system is so, frankly, dysfunctional that it beggars the imagination even to wrap your mind around how labyrinthine or Byzantine, actually, the system has become. And
all right, I've really got to ask you, I've got to stop you and ask you, look, I don't talk to people every day like you. And number two, I definitely don't talk to people every day who briefed a CIA director, Clinton's, I believe, on the kinds of things that you're talking about right now. I would love to hear what that meeting was like. Can you talk about it? I mean, really.
Well, I can, and it was very upsetting, actually, for me. And, people who don't know who I am, I'm an emergency and trauma doctor. So, I've gone from one level of trauma to real trauma. I tell people taking care of, gunshot wounds and head-on collisions and people's heart attacks was so much easier than this stuff. And what I learned, you have to imagine, I'm a guy in my 30s. I'm working full-time, running an emergency department. I have 4 young kids. I'm shuttling up to Washington doing this, frankly, crazy stuff. And it was very, very stressful. And so one of the most disturbing parts of this meeting, which, of course, I thought it would be, usually when you're with someone who's a cabinet-level person, it's 20 minutes, it's 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes. This went on for nearly 3 hours, Art.
Wow.
And I'm sitting there with this man, and, of course, in the house we're in is surrounded by Secret Service folks, which, of course, my naivete back then, I thought we were just going to have dinner and that'd be it. Of course, these guys are all over the place. And what happened is that initially I came in there with a briefcase chock full of what you just asked for. Photographs, videotapes, government documents, transcripts of these testimonies from people who've been on the inside and seen this stuff. And after about 10 minutes, the CIA director said, Woolsey said to me, I know these exist. And it turns out that he and his wife had seen one back years ago when they lived up in New Hampshire. So the thing that he was most interested in, and he looked straight at me, he looked straight in the eyes, and he said, Dr. Greer, what I want to know is why it is being kept this secret. And
this
why.
This is the CIA director asking you why it's being kept secret.
Yes, because he was being lied to, and so was the president. So later I did meet a guy in the science director at the CIA, who I don't want to name, but who I've been in touch with for a couple decades now, and who I've met with very recently, who did go in and provide some mop-up information for Bill Clinton. But at that time, what I wouldn't have believed, and which most people have a hard time understanding. I know not long ago I was meeting with some senior French Air Force and intelligence officials who were in charge of briefing the president of France on this material, and they came to my condo in D.C. and then out to my farm near the University of Virginia, and we were having this long discussion, and they said, we can't imagine that people at that level of your government would be deceived on this sort of information. I said, well, it happens every day. I said, what you have to understand is that the black budget of the United States is between $100 and $200 billion a year. In other words, we can't keep track of more money than the largest defense budget of any other country in the world, and that includes Russia or China or Great Britain or France. So I said, you have to understand it's through the looking glass here. And so that was my coming of age. And so the meeting with the CIA director proceeded from, what I thought was going to be an evidential discovery, learning process, and sharing what I had collected, to sort of an exploration of how really dysfunctional the system has become and how dangerously out of control this is.
Well, if he had not heard these things previously, then my impression would be that a CIA director worth his salt would be angry that he didn't have this from other sources.
Well, he was furious. And I have to say, by the end of the night, I had prepared a document, which is actually in my first book, it was available on our website, seriousdisclosure.com. And it was basically a white paper with a list of suggestions and executive orders and things that the president should do. And I put something like this together also for President Obama when he came in at the request of some of his friends. And what I found was that at the end of the meeting, we're getting ready to leave. It's been a very long night, and went much longer than I thought it would be. And I had to get back down to my hospital. And I'm holding this document. My hands are almost shaking. They are shaking. And I'm this young guy, meeting with this very powerful CIA director. And I look at him, I said, here's some recommendations of what you can do to help get this information disclosed, and more importantly, get the technologies under control so we can bring them out to replace oil and gas and coal. And he looked me square in the eye and he said, Dr. Greer, how do we disclose that which we have no operational control over? We don't have access to this material. And it was this chilling moment where you're sitting with someone, ostensibly, it's like you kind of realize the emperor has no clothes. And it's a very sobering, sad moment. And at the same time, it was a little bit farcical, because I knew at this point that the man was not making this up. And then subsequently, I don't talk about this much, but it's the waters pass under the bridge enough. I feel I can say these people are out of office. But I had a very similar meeting with the General Patrick Hughes, who was the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Now, for the listeners out there who don't know what that is, that's like the CIA within the Pentagon. It was the part of the Pentagon hit on 9/11, by the way, when Rumsfeld ran out and was helping people. And the general, who was head of the DIA at the time, who was a 3-star, invited me and one of my military advisors to come and brief him. And, he turned to me and he went over to the shelf, his bookshelf, and he said, this was within the first 10 minutes of the meeting, and he said, Dr. Greer, he says, the only thing I've gotten from channels within the Defense Intelligence Agency on this is this. And it was a little like a doll of an E.T. toy doll that someone had given him as a gag gift. Now, this is the general in charge of the Defense Intelligence Agency. And he says, what in the hell is going on? He asked me the same thing that the CIA director, Woolsey, asked me. I said, well, General, you're in good company. This happens quite often. There are people on your staff who are permanently in the DIA who know about this, but but they're just not giving you this information because they don't feel that you're going to be here long enough to need to know this. And there was a colonel sitting at that table who stiffened, and his body language said to both me and my military advisor, that guy knew and was lying to the old man, to the general. So this kind of game is played a lot. I mean, is it constitutional? No. Is it legal? No. But it really is how Washington works, quote unquote, or doesn't work, which is why we're in the mess we're in. And I think that this is, another story. Do you remember Gordon Cooper, the astronaut?
Of course.
Oh, well, here's a great story for your folks who are new to this. Gordon Cooper, you can Google him. He was one of the early Mercury astronauts, and he was one of our Disclosure Project witnesses, and we have him on videotape up on our website. And he, back before he was an astronaut, I think at the time he was a colonel at Edwards Air Force Base, where Edwards Air Force Base is. And this is 1956, so this is a long time ago, 50-some years ago. And he was there when, in broad daylight, one of these objects landed on a dry lake bed. Now, it was his team, his reconnaissance team, and people who reported to him who actually went out there, and they filmed this. It was an old, of course, real movie footage, not digital. And they brought
you know that Gordon Cooper told me the story you're relating right now.
Yeah, and
I interviewed him. Hell of a story. Keep going.
Well,
keep going.
So, but the part you don't know is something that's going to blow your socks off. Okay, so he puts this together, looks at it, it's developed, he looks at the film, and it's authentic, and there's this object in broad daylight. It is flown back on a general's plane to the Pentagon.
That's right.
All right. And there's a whole lot of back and forth and detail I'm not going to waste time with, but the bottom line is, fast forward to a few years before Gordon Cooper passed away. And he and I are given addresses to the Federalist Society, which is a pretty conservative group in Washington, who had invited him and me to address them on the UFO issue. And I'm talking to him before I give my presentation. And Gordon Cooper, my wife is with me, looks at me and he says, the Secretary of Defense, William Cohen, asked me about this because he wanted to be able to go and retrieve that footage, because Cohen, of course, believed Gordon Cooper. He knew that Gordon Cooper would not make this up, and that he had what's called actionable intelligence.
Of course he didn't make it up.
Okay, so here's what happens is that the Secretary of Defense of the United States of America gets all this information directly, which I had gotten also from this American hero, Gordon Cooper. He begins to dig into this, into the Pentagon, and comes up, and he finds out that all of that material is out of his reach, and it is in the Black Pit of Calcutta. So basically, here you have a Secretary of Defense who is making directed inquiries on a specific incident with material and actionable intelligence from a U.S. astronaut, an early U.S. astronaut, and he can't get nothing. So Gordon Cooper tells me this story, and I think Gordon Cooper thought I'd be shocked. And I said, oh, no, this is what I would expect to have happen.
Gordon told me that the pictures just disappeared, Doc.
They went into the parallel universe program of the so-called Black World. And actually, the proper name, to just educate your listeners, and some of them listening may have heard this, I actually met a man in Washington recently who had heard the term and didn't know what it meant. And they're called USAP, USAP, Unacknowledged Special Access Projects. Now, everybody knows what a special access project is. It's the U part. It's the unacknowledged part. And the way those work is that, let's say, I'm a colonel and you are the Secretary of Defense. Well, obviously you outrank me. You're the civilian boss of the Pentagon. But if I'm in an unacknowledged special access project, a USAP, I am instructed that no one outside that compartment is ever to know anything about it, because it is completely unacknowledged, off the books, and black. And that if I am ordered to give information on it, I am to respond that to whoever it is, sir, no such project exists. It doesn't matter if you're the president. Now, a member of my team was in a $3 billion unacknowledged special access project. Just one project. And the admiral that he reported to had all the men who were in that project go into a SCIF, a secure communication intelligence facility underground. and they had all their weapons taken away, all their electronics, and there was one man who went down there with a firearm, and he said, "Gentlemen," and he took a bullet out of the gun, and he said, "There's a bullet with your name on it, and if you disclose to anyone outside this compartment of the existence of this project, this bullet will find you." Now, I'm telling you virtually word for word what this military, fairly senior military guy who's been on my team for many, many years told me. And so this is the kind of spooky nonsense that goes on. And with that kind of compartment and unacknowledged status, they can get away with a lot. You know, one of the things we came out with a couple of months ago, or maybe 4 or 5 months ago now, is a movie called Sirius. Ironically, here we are on Sirius XM. And it was the largest crowd-funded documentary in history, by the way. But part of what's in there, anyone who wants to see it can see it on our site at SeriousDisclosure.com. In there, there's a clip of Donald Rumsfeld, the day before 9/11, ironically, at the Pentagon stating, and I'm quoting, "There's $2.3 trillion unaccounted for in the Department of Defense over the last few years. Trillion, not billion." So this is the missing $2.3 trillion, but that's 12 years ago. So now it's probably 3 or 4 trillion. And it's going into these kinds of projects. And this is what the American public has no idea about. They think that the budget debates that we're having are legitimate discussions. I'm going, oh no, I mean, you got $4 trillion missing.
Okay, Doctor, a quick question for you, and then we've got to go to a quick break. And
Sure.
The question is, yes, you had a really good career as an emergency room physician. Weren't you back then, back in your 30s, weren't you scared to death that you were going to, drive a sword right through your career?
Well, no, because I had established myself as someone in the community as a really good doctor, and had become chairman of the Department of Emergency Medicine. And people knew, even though they were a little perplexed at why I got involved with all this. And as you know, my uncle was a senior project engineer that worked on designing the lunar module, the first man on the moon at Grumman, which became Northrop Grumman. So I had a knowledge and an interest in this since I was 8 or 9 years of age. But I think that, no, it really didn't hurt. I was worried it might, but luckily, people knew me and my skills as a doctor first before. Now, I think, to be honest with you, if I had gotten involved in this subject before I had gotten established in medicine, it would have been a major problem. But
so it's kind of like tenure. Hold on, we're going to take a break here very quickly, and we'll come right back.
Sure.
Boy, talk about a guest that you just sort of have to point at, and they take off and go. This is one of them. But listen very closely, because what this man is telling you is the complete truth, beginning to end. So if you, were agnostic about it or a non-believer, then listen carefully, because some of what he's going to tell you is going to definitely blow your mind.
Again, we're on mute due to the musical bumper. Once the bumper is done, we'll be back to Dark Matter. From Sirius XM.
855 Real UFOs. That's 1-855-732-5836.
Don't do that right now. No point in doing it. We've got what we've done is actually busied the lines out so that you won't just sit there and dial, which you may want to do anyway, but please don't. We'll let you know when the lines open, and Dr. Greer doesn't take a lot of questions, so nor does he take many pauses. It's absolutely amazing, actually. Dr. Greer, welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah.
You really can go almost without taking a breath. I've been sitting here amazed at that.
Oh, well, I'm just sharing the sort of like the tips of the iceberg that I know. Yeah.
Yeah, when you get going. In terms of, our government has told us, way back after Roswell, that, among other things, UFOs are no threat militarily to the United States. Now, they've said that, and of course that they're just not real. There's no documented cases, and that's bull. We just finished talking about a U.S. astronaut who watched one land, took photographs of it that went into a black hole somewhere, and there's a lot more stories, and these stories are real, aren't they? In other words...
Oh, sure, they're backed up with documents and with radar traces and everything else. So, it's like, I often get asked, hey, where's the beef, where's the evidence? I said, well,
right.
It's there. The fact that you haven't seen it those are two separate issues. And by the way, a lot of the people that I've met with in the government who are pranced out to tell people, oh, well, this isn't true, and we know nothing of this. They're actually telling the truth from their perspective. In other words,
sure.
They honestly don't know anything about it. And when they make an inquiry through this massive, huge, complex system that's built up since World War II, they can't penetrate into the secrecy. And so when they report out to the public, this is where you get into this whole concept of plausible deniability. They would pass a lie detector test, and they're not lying. So now, are there some devils out there who do know who've lied in the past? Yes. But for the most part, the people who go out there and say this, who are usually fairly low-level people or people who wouldn't have a need to know, are speaking the truth to the extent they know it.
Okay. What is your view? Our military has said they're not a threat to us. Are they, or are they not, Doctor?
Oh, I think not. One of the things that I went and did back some years ago, I went to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where a lot of the remains of some of these objects that we had targeted with electromagnetic weapons that had been downed were sent back in the early days. Now we're talking the post-World War II period and onward. It's not really that key of facility anymore, but Wright-Patterson was way back in those days. And I was asked to have a meeting there with the head of the Foreign Aerospace Science and Technology Center, which had been the Foreign Technology Division of the Air Force. And in fact, the man who ordered it was the head of intelligence for the Joint Staff. And I went there, and one of the things that the colonel in charge, Colonel Canola, asked me, he said, well, in your study of this, you think that they could be a threat to our national security? I said, you're asking the wrong question. Could they be? Yes. Obviously, if you have interstellar travel capability, you're kind of beyond rockets and jets, all right? But are they? The answer is no, because I said, given the galactically stupid things we have done, where we have pursued them and fired on these objects, et cetera, and so forth, if they were hostile, it would have been point, set, match, over, back about 1945. In other words, about the time we detonated the first atomic weapon at the Trinity site, if this had been the intent of these visitors, it would have been made crystal clear to us. So I'm very skeptical of all the sci-fi and, they're coming to eat us for lunch routine that you hear from folks.
But there was there not, an instance in which UFOs hovered above a ICBM facility?
Oh, yeah.
And actually began a countdown, started a countdown here in the U.S., and then I believe shut one down in the USSR at that time. And if that's not a threat...
Well, no, actually what happened is that they took at least 16 intercontinental ballistic missiles at Minot, North Dakota, offline and rendered them non-launchable. Now, the same thing was happening in the old Soviet Union. Yes. And the men, we have several of these men who were at the facility in Minot, North Dakota when this happened.
Do you know where I heard that, Doctor? It was on years ago, 2020.
Yes, and actually I met with Sam Donaldson and talked to him about this at ABC News about what they had looked into over in the Soviet Union and what we, by piecing these cases together, and also with Colonel Diedrichson. Colonel Diedrichson, if you go to our website, SeriousDisclosure.com, he's one of our witnesses who was over the old Atomic Energy Commission, that's now the Department of Energy. But his responsibility were all nuclear processing facilities, weapons storage areas in the United States arsenal. That was his position. And what he and other people I've talked to have said to me is that there was a clear interest by these visitors in these weapons, but not in a hostile way, but a concern that we might end up destroying this whole planet, which for all we know, they may have a long-term interest in that goes back for thousands, perhaps millions of years, and that's another discussion. But obviously, what they were trying to say, and in fact, one of the Captain Sala, who was there at the mine of North Dakota, when I talked to him about this, he said his feeling about this, as this was unfolding with this luminous object outside the silo, and with these 16 thermonuclear weapons with multiple warheads, by the way, going offline and being rendered unlaunchable, is that the message he felt they were sending was, if you fools go to mutual assured destruction, we can do something about that, but for God's sakes, don't. In other words, it's sort of a cautionary thing, because let's take two steps, big, long steps back.
Well, maybe that was a message, but listen, the military usually doesn't get subtle messages. I mean, when you shut down their ICBMs, they think big time threat.
Well, they see certainly the capability to render all those little toys pretty useless, and I think from my perspective, good. But from the perspective of someone whose responsibility it is to keep us in a state of readiness to launch those objects, if we had a full thermonuclear exchange during the Cold War, it would have been the end of life on Earth, and everybody knows that with nuclear winter and what have you. But I think that the bigger question is, if those events are true, and they are, and here's the case, and in fact we have the documents, we have multiple independent corroborating witnesses to this case that you just asked about in the Disclosure Project materials. What was the point? Well, I think the point was, when you piece it together with what was going on in the old Soviet Union, and very similar events, is that they were trying to get us to rethink that whole strategy of mutual assured destruction.
What happened in the Soviet Union?
Well, there were multiple events where silos and thermonuclear missiles, intercontinental missiles, were rendered not only unlaunchable, but were actually, in a couple cases where they were testing them, at least the missile part of it, were made to go completely haywire. In fact, there's a case where this was happening, as you know, from Vandenberg Air Force Base. The same thing happened with one of our witnesses for the Disclosure Project testified that he was there doing all the very high-tech imagery of this launch. And so this is what happened in the Soviet Union. They launched one of these, didn't have an active hot, obviously, a nuclear warhead on it, but they were trying, and they would be intercepted, and basically as they became exo-atmospheric, in other words, just as they're leaving the atmosphere and go intercontinental, they're pretty much just taken out, neutralized. And he actually saw this happen. This particular witness from a Vandenberg Air Force Base launch, and after he and Major Flores started talking about this, he was threatened. He had his mailbox blown up. He had all kinds of weird stuff start happening, and weird calls in the middle of the night, cursing at him and what have you. But he stayed, and he's a professor, Jacobs, and he has come forward, and we have his testimony now about that whole event. Well, similar things were happening in the old Soviet Union, and by the way, also with some of the French and British facilities. One of the most compelling and interesting cases that, of course, I spoke at great length with the former head of the Ministry of Defense for Great Britain, Lord Hill Norton, who I spent some time at his home in Hampshire discussing all this. And back in the about 1980, 81, I believe it was, we had at the Randlesham Forest the Bentwaters case, they call it, the Bentwaters Royal Air Force Base. It was actually more of a U.S. Air Force Base. It was both British and U.S., but it was a covert nuclear weapons facility that was not acknowledged to the Soviet Union, and would have caused a huge amount of political problems in Great Britain. And with our talks with the Soviet Union, had it been acknowledged, but there were hot thermonuclear weapons there. and it was a ready base, even though it wasn't acknowledged to the public. And for several nights, there were these UFOs seen in the skies near this Air Force base. And then on one particular night, there was an object that came down and landed out on the edge of the base. And of course, later they tried to debunk it that, they just saw a distant lighthouse, and they make up all kinds of absurd stories. But the men who actually were sent out there to see this particular object, it turns out it was a black pyramid-shaped ET craft that, as it landed, it came down and it actually scraped some trees and broke some branches and then left a perfectly square base landing area with various changes, radiological changes in the soil that has now been confirmed by the Ministry of Defense of Great Britain. Now, this was denied and lied about for years in the United Kingdom. And interestingly, Lord Hill Norton, who was a five-star admiral back then, they had what they call Sea Lords, and he was the five-star admiral. He was the head of the military committee for NATO, but he was also the Minister of Defense. And in Great Britain, for those who don't know, that also means you're head of MI5, and MI6 is like our CIA director, all in one position. So I'm sitting here talking to this gentleman, and he's telling me that the entire time he was Minister of Defense, and on the head of the military committee for NATO, he had no knowledge of this subject. It was only afterwards that he began to find out about it. And he was furious. Frankly, I'm sitting at this man's house. He's this old, admiral. And he is like hopping mad. I mean, pissed off that here he was sitting on top of the entire defense establishment in Great Britain. There were these sort of events going on kind of under his nose. He had no knowledge of it. And he admitted that to me. And
all right. So, I mean, what you're telling me, and have told me again and again in these first segments, is that there is a government, and then there is a group of people who have this information, control this information, and control those who would like to know this information, apparently, in government. In other words, we have a government within or beyond a government.
Right, and it is precisely what Eisenhower was warning about. When Eisenhower said, beware the military-industrial complex, I mean, he was a five-star general, World War II hero. He was not anti-military. He was opposed to this out-of-control aspect of it that, and I'm not criticizing Eisenhower, but this whole mess got out of control on his watch between 1953 and 1961. That's when.
All right, Doctor, why not disclosure? In other words, with the shape the world's in right now, not that hot, frankly.
Right.
It seems to me that disclosure, if done correctly,
right,
would just lift all boats.
And, yeah. No, not all boats. Now let me stop you right there.
Most boats. How about that?
Yeah, 99.99999% of humanity's boats would be listed. The 0.0000 forget the 1%. We're talking about the uber elite. And actually at this meeting I was attending a couple weeks ago with all these leaders from around the world, and you had people there from Goldman Sachs and McKinsey and Boston Consulting Group and all kinds of folks. And what the discussion, the title of the entire conference weekend was From Disruption Opportunity. And I was there to present the case for disrupting the current status quo of terminating the oil, gas, and coal industries over the next 10 to 20 years and bringing these sciences out that would explain how UFOs are moving. Now, the reason for the secrecy in the early days, I mean, let's go to ancient times, 40s, 50s, 60s. A, they didn't know what they were dealing with. B, they were trying to figure out how these objects moved. Going, for example, the head of the Belgian Air Force, General de Brouwer, when we went to Belgium, and, here he's talking about the fact that in Belgium they had these massive triangular ships that were about 800 feet on each side, that were going from completely still and hovering to several thousand miles per hour straight up against gravity and making right-hand turns outside the envelope of any normal aerodynamics of a jet or a rocket or anything else. And I have a quote actually on our website from him talking about this, and we actually have a radar tape of that event from Belgium. So what's interesting is that obviously these objects aren't using Exxon Jet A fuel. They're not using oil. They're not using normal rockets and things of this sort. And so the technology and the physics, and this is the part of this that I actually was the hardest part to kind of get through the head of the policy people at this meeting, is that the secrecy has nothing to do with ETs, and it has nothing to do with the fact that people are going to hurl themselves off the Brooklyn Bridge if there's intelligent life out there. I mean, more than half the public believes there's life out there already. What
you're going to tell me it's energy.
It's about money and power and energy. So, you know, let's cut to the chase here. These UFOs are not operating using the internal combustion engine that Mercedes invented in 1888 or what have you. All right.
Sure,
so this is not your granddad's Oldsmobile.
Okay. So, all right. So there are many different types of propulsion that we can imagine. Here's my next question. Are we actually, Doctor, aware of operational details of propulsion systems that could be applied to U.S. and world energy needs?
Yes, and you know what's interesting in a document that was released accidentally in Canada that dates from 1951. Now, this was before I was a twinkle in my father's eye, by a man named Wilbur Smith, and it's a top secret document. He was head of Project Magnet that was studying this issue in Canada, and I'm quoting here. Where he says, the matter is the most highly classified subject in the United States government, rating higher even than the H-bomb. Flying saucers exist, period. Their modus operandi, meaning their propulsion system, is unknown, but a concentrated effort is being made by a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush. The entire matter is considered by the United States authorities to be of tremendous significance. Now, this is an uncontested top-secret document. Who was Vannevar Bush? He was the guy who headed up the Manhattan Project, the mastermind behind it, much more so than Keller and Oppenheimer. So what began in the 40s and 50s, in particular after World War II, was...
It's always a Bush.
Yeah, they're not related, but was a very serious, very, very serious look at how are these objects getting their energy supply, and how are they moving in these non-aerodynamic ways. Now, by October, a man who I've worked with for many years, the senior scientist at the Naval Research Labs, Rick Foch, the third-ranking highest guy at the Naval Research Labs, was in the, quote, the vault that has a lot of the documents on this issue. And he was able to confirm to us that in October of 1954, around that date, again, before I was a twinkle in my father's eye, we mastered, quote, gravity control. In other words, the energy and propulsion aspects of these objects were definitively known by October 1954. So for the last 50-some years, our burning oil and gas and coal and using jet engines and all that jazz has just really been an artifice, because it's a multi-trillion, in fact, a multi-hundred trillion dollar asset-based question of what do you do? And yes, most people would benefit from this information, and anyone interested in the future of the earth and in sustainability and the environment and world poverty and 7 billion people in China and in India, 2.5 billion in China and India, trying to live like you and I do, burning coal for our electricity. Anyone with an IQ greater than mud is going to go, how are we going to keep doing this? We can't. Now, however, if you're one of the masters of the universe, at Goldman Sachs, or in these big trading houses with all their enormous wealth that they're trading on the petrodollar system and all these commodities, quote unquote, such as oil and gas and coal and natural gas and centralized utilities and on and on and on. This is not a few billion or a few hundred billion. This is trillions and trillions of dollars in assets that are hanging in the balance. And so it's really the tail is wagging the dog here. And so the secrecy has much more to do with geopolitical power and keeping kind of the status quo as it is. Now, at a certain way back, you could kind of almost understand it because people didn't understand that we were going to go from having 3 or 4 billion people to 7 billion people, on and on and on. But now in 2013, I would think the secrecy has become an existential threat to our civilization. And this is what the first CIA director was saying when he said that the threat isn't from the UFOs, it's from the secrecy around the subject. And that's what he says.
My IQ is only hovering above mud, but it's there. So I want to ask you, do you have the details on these energy systems? Do you know the answer to this? Do you know what kind of energy we can suddenly begin using, Doctor, that we're not using, that's been held secret? Or do you know who knows?
The answer to both, yes. But, I'm just a country doctor here in Virginia, and I'm not not an engineer. But do I understand it, and have I seen how these objects work? Yes. In fact, I was in a facility near the Huntsville Space Flight Center in the Redstone Arsenal a few years ago, where I was taken into a place where there were these objects that were hovering and floating around using this type of high voltage system, and it was an ion propulsion. And later this same system was reproduced at the hangar at the Naval Research Labs there in near Washington, not far from where this shooting just happened yesterday. And the people who were part of that project have spent time at my home, and what they discussed is that if you take a very high voltage signal system and you put it at a certain resonant frequency, a certain cycles per second, all right? We're not talking about 110 voltage or 220 out of your home outlet, but millions of volts, but at very low current. So you're not using much power. Okay. You can create what's called a Poynting vector. I don't want to get too much into the physics so people fall asleep, but you can create a vector into what's called the 0-point energy field, and you can pull energy out of this so-called 0-point energy field or quantum vacuum that is huge amount of energy. I mean, it's estimated that every cubic centimeter of space in your room where you're sitting would run the United States for a day just because there's so much potential power there. Now, has this been proven and published in physics journals? Yes. Look up the Casimir effect. The Casimir effect decades ago was proven, and it's been reproduced, that this 0-point energy field exists. The question is, have there been any breakthroughs in the application of this theoretical physics?
All right, Doctor, yes. hold your head. We've got to do a break, so relax, take a good deep breath, and we'll be right back.
Sure.
And with that, we will return to them tomorrow at this time to pick up the dark matter UFO extraterrestrials. At this point, we will bring day 3 to a close here in the New World. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. Get us to those goals for Boxy, Nexters, and YouTube to pay attention. 5,000 views, 1,000 subscribers. Coinbase.com information below. Get yourself your $10 free in crypto. And those Coinbase lessons, 2-minute lessons, 1-question quizzes to get yourself another $100 in crypto. Until tomorrow, it's always a great new world to release the Krakens. Thanks for watching from day 1.